Shalom, Bethel family. It's Thursday and time again for our review of last week's Torah talk. Last week we studied Parshat Va-Era, the Parshat HaShavua, the second Torah portion in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And it's a portion where we start hearing about plagues. Moses is back in Egypt after his exile and has come to demand from Pharaoh that he let his people go. We started our discussion with a conversation about the difference between heart and mind. Right? We debated what's the more important, what's the more influential on who we are and what we do. Is it the rational mind, how we figure things out and problem solve, or is it the heart, how we feel things and how we and how we sense the world around us? Overwhelmingly, the thought among the congregation was that the heart is the more powerful influence on our lives, and it's an opinion that is borne out in Jewish thought as well. I shared one Hasidic parable about a king who, throws a big banquet. At big banquets, what do kings do? They get drunk, horribly drunk, and in his drunken state, he declares that on a given date in the future, he's going to throw open the gates of his palace and of his treasury, and anyone who wants to can come in and take whatever they want. Of course, the next morning he wakes up, he realizes what he's done, and he's mortified. What am I going to do? I don't want to give away all my wealth. So he gets together all of his advisors and his wise men, and they come up with a plan. And so when the day arrives, the gates of the palace compound are thrown open, and the people come in to the courtyard to find it full of just the most wondrous things, this mesmerizing music, beautiful exotic birds flitting from between fruit trees that are in full bloom and giving their fruit, and it's like a magic wonderland. And all the people come in, and they stop there to eat and enjoy the entertainment and caught up in the music. Except one person, a young man who realizes that the gates of the palace are open, and inside the gates of the palace, the treasury. So this one guy's going in and making trips back and forth with all the wealth that he can manage, the wealth that he can keep, as opposed to the fleeting images before everyone in the courtyard. And as he goes out, he's yelling to the people, "You fools! There's a permanent treasure that you can keep deep inside, and here you are distracted by what's in the courtyard." And the whole parable is a metaphor for the heart and the mind, right? The courtyard is the mind. The mind can entertain us, and the mind can force us in certain directions. But ultimately, at our core, the real treasure is the heart, right? The real treasure is, and the real influence in our lives is what comes from here. And that's why no matter how rationally we might think something is good for us, we might still be frozen with fear and not do it. Or vice versa, we could rationally know that something is bad for us, say a relationship with a certain person, and yet follow our heart's desire to that end. Even in the Shema, we're told that the second paragraph, when we follow our hearts to idol worship, right? It's not our minds. We know it's not good for us, but it's something our hearts can influence us to do. That seems to be a lot of what's going on for Pharaoh in the Parsha, is this conflict between his heart and his mind, right? His mind rationally keeps telling him, look, we need to end this, our people are suffering, but his heart keeps hardening and pushing him back down this terrible path, even though his mind seems to know it's not what's best for him. And it's interesting, if we look at chapter 7 of Exodus, verses 3, 13, and 14, each talk about this hardening of Pharaoh's heart, but each uses a slightly different Hebrew word to refer to it. And if you got this video from Bethel's email, then you could download the source sheet, and you'll see on there, verse 3 uses the verb aksheh for Pharaoh's heart, right? God is saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. This is a prophecy, and I will increase my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. And to harden here is akshe. If you're familiar with modern Hebrew, kashe means difficult. But here akshe, I think, is coming from the more biblical meaning, like am kshe oref, right? The Jewish people are a stiff-necked people. Kshe is stiff, right? So he says, I will make Pharaoh's heart stiff and unbendable, unflexible, right? And then later, in verse 13, he says, but Pharaoh's heart remained steadfast, and he did not hearken to the signs, as the Lord had spoken. But here now it's vayechazak lev paro, right? That it became chazak. To be chozek is to be strong, right? So here Pharaoh's heart is strengthened. It's digging into the trenches. It's being stubborn, right? So we've got his heart hardening, being stiff. We've got it being stubborn. And then the very next verse, the Lord says to Moses, kaved lev paro, right? That Pharaoh's heart is kaved. Kaved means heavy, right? Immovable. So Pharaoh's heart, if we read carefully and look at these three different words, it doesn't just have one problem that it's hardened. It's all kinds of things going on. It's stiff and inflexible. It's stubborn and it's heavy. It's impossible to move. It's just can't push it, no matter how much the intellect maybe knows this will be best. It's immovable like a giant boulder. And the commentaries, don't pick up on this so much, but they do ask an important question, right? Which is, why, if we know that Pharaoh's heart is hardened, does it also say that he won't listen? Going back to verses 3 and 4, it says, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart, increase my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. And in verse 4, but Pharaoh will not hearken to you. Right, so what's the difference? Right? What's the difference between having a hard heart and not listening? Isn't the hard-heartedness, doesn't that imply that he won't listen? And if he's not listening, doesn't it imply a hard heart? And it's a question that Kedushat Levi asks in his commentary on Va-Era. Right, quoting the Or HaChaim, he says, after it says, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart, why does God say, but Pharaoh will not hearken to you, etc.? I think there's a very important point indicated by that, which is the difference between the mind and the heart. Right, so the mind might decide to listen or not listen. Right, that's a conscious act. You can decide, I'm interested in this, I'm not interested in this, I'm going to follow this, I'm not going to follow this. But the heart is doing something unconsciously. Right? The heart is stiff. The heart is inflexible. The heart is stubborn, and the heart ultimately is heavy and immovable. And that's what's happening for Pharaoh is this disconnect between his heart and his mind. As we said at the beginning of the discussion, it's the heart that is the more influential. So ultimately, from plague to plague, Pharaoh changes his mind, perhaps. But he never changes his heart. His heart stays heavy. And the heart is an organ of habit. So if we continue to operate with a stiff heart, it only gets more stiff, just like the rest of the muscles in our body. Right? If we don't move them, they kind of seize up. Well, the heart works the same way. If we don't exercise our heart, if we don't act with compassion and generosity, which is the heart's natural state, then ultimately it will become its habit to not be compassionate and to not be generous. So what Pharaoh is missing, and maybe what a lot of us are missing, is a change of heart. Right? That's the real change that we seek in our lives. Not just a change of mind. That's easy, and maybe is a first step to a change of heart. But to change the heart takes practice. This week, starting tonight in our community, we are having Alan Morinis come as our Tidewater Together Mickey Kramer Scholar in Residence. And mussar, the brand of Judaism or the spiritual practice that Alan Morinis teaches and is an expert in, is all about this changing the heart. Right? Rabbi Elia Lopian, one of the mussar masters, said mussar is making the heart feel what the intellect understands. Right? It's making this connect on the good things. And we read in Alan Morinis' work, Path of the Soul, he talks about this, right? That a move towards holiness, to move towards holiness, one must yearn for it. One must be propelled by a spiritual willingness, nidivut halev, a generosity of the heart. And then he goes on, we live in a money-centric world, and generosity goes beyond our wallets, and he talks about how we can be generous with our time and with our compassion and all these different kinds of things. And here's the important thing he says, he's quoting Alan Morinis, we are naturally inclined to give like that, but we can act on that inclination only when our heart is open. And that isn't always the case, he says. When our hearts are closed or walled off, we are suffering from a spiritual ailment that the mussar teachers have called timtum halev, literally the stopped up heart. Think of Pharaoh, he says, right? He's not making a commentary necessarily on our Parsha, but I think he is. Instead of being open, flowing, and generous, we are sluggish, constipated, and unwilling. Now, I don't know if it's a coincidence that Alan Morinis picked 3 different adjectives for the stopped up heart. Sluggish, right? Kaved. Constipated, right? Kasheh. And unwilling, chozek, at our core. We can't be like Pharaoh. We need to teach our hearts. And one great way to do it is to adopt a mussar practice. And that can start tonight at Tidewater Together, Friday night at Oav Shalom, Saturday morning. Alan Morinis will be speaking at Bethel and at various other places Saturday night and Sunday. I hope you'll join us to learn from this master of mussar, this master of changing the heart. I hope you'll also reflect with me on how much our job is not so much to change our minds, which we spend a lot of time doing, convincing ourselves, but ultimately to change our heart, to change the way we operate in the world, the way we feel about the world. And when we do that, we truly change ourselves for the better, and hopefully with that impact, also change the world for the better. May we all manage to have that kind of change of heart. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a blessed week ahead.